Hello everyone. Welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath, and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. On the morning of August 11th, 1977, a Seaside, California, police officer forced open the door to a small duplex and discovered 4 females from 3 generations of the Smith family dead, each suffering an overwhelming number of stab wounds. Looking into the kitchen, he saw Josephine Smith, the white-haired grandmother, lying lifeless beside her 27-year-old daughter, Suzanne Harris, who in turn lay next to her 6-year-old daughter, Rachel Harris. In the bedroom, Renee Ferguson, another 15-year-old granddaughter of the Smith family and Suzanne's niece, was found dead, sprawled across the bed with her hands bound behind her back. All 4 had not been seen since attending church on Tuesday night, August 9th. After the service, Grandma Smith had promised the Assembly of God church pastor that they would return the following evening for his evangelical seminar. But they never showed. It was unusual for Grandma Smith to miss such a commitment. The pastor had considered checking on them, but his attention had been drawn elsewhere. That on Wednesday morning, both Suzanne Harris and Renee Ferguson were expected to be at work. Suzanne at an electrical firm and Renee at her summer job obtained through the Youth Job Corps. Neither of them appeared, and Suzanne's car remained in the carport, exactly where it had been parked the night before. Later that Wednesday night, a friend of Renee's mother asked a neighbor who knew the family to check on them the following morning when he left for work. At 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, August 11th, no one answered the front door. As he began to walk away, however, he noticed a light in the bedroom, looked through the window, and saw Renee lying face down on a blood-soaked bed with her hands tied behind her back. About 10 minutes later, the officer was kicking down the door to what would become the most horrific crime scene of his career. Inside the home, detectives discovered a scene of human slaughter that resembled something out of a low-budget teenage slasher film. The kind aimed at young audiences craving an emotional thrill. An autopsy later revealed that each victim had been stabbed between 19 and 45 times. The wounds were inflicted with a knife so long that nearly all would have been instantly fatal. Despite 3 victims lying clustered together on the linoleum kitchen floor, almost every surface in the small home appeared untouched by blood. I walked in and saw blood all over, and the officer told me to get out, the neighbor later told reporters. I don't ever want to see anything like that again. It nearly made me sick. While there was a significant amount of blood, it was what they didn't find that would make the investigation drag on far longer than anyone in the community could endure. The windows and door were not broken. There didn't appear to be any struggle inside the home. None of the victims have been sexually assaulted. Nothing of value was taken from the home or from any of the victims. In short, there were no clues, no suspects, and no motive. But what they did have was a hell of a lot of blood. And hidden in that blood, they would later discover footprints visible only in crime scene photographs. After careful analysis, investigators identified one large shoe print and another smaller print, perhaps a bare foot. Who did it belong to? Rachel? Although inexperienced in handling a house full of murdered women, slain by what seemed like some faceless, movie monster figure wielding a long knife and a short temper, the Seaside Police Department deployed every resource at their disposal. Their investigation was meticulous and professional. They did what was required. Every person who knew the family was interviewed, twice. In total, 500 people would be interviewed before the investigation concluded. They scoured the area for clues, followed every tip and lead submitted to a special hotline, issued bulletins, and even called in reinforcements from the State Bureau of Investigation. But when the crime wasn't solved quickly, the fear-gripping Seaside residents turned into anger and frustration at their own police force. In a community of just 23,000 people, they believed the force was too small to handle the kind of mass murder that should have occurred somewhere else. After the bodies were discovered, citizens organized brigades to patrol the streets on foot. Volunteers with CB radios drove the back roads all night, communicating in official-sounding language about all clear this and suspicious activity that, by the end of 3 weeks, they grew tired of playing cops and movie monster hunters. With no suspect in custody, family members complained to the mayor and the media. Soon after, journalists began asking pointed questions about the investigation being conducted by only 3 detectives from the Seaside Police Force. The lack of trust from the public became so severe that the California Department of Justice had to investigate the investigation itself. When their evaluation was released on September 19th, it stated that the performance of Seaside detectives is complete and being conducted competently, and concluded that no further involvement by the state DOJ was necessary. In short, the local police were doing their job. They just needed a break in the case. That break came from an anonymous 19-year-old girl who called a hotline to give the authorities the name of the killer's new girlfriend. The caller was the ex-girlfriend calling to get her replacement arrested. Her name was Terry Milligan, 14, and she was pregnant with the killer's baby. When detectives asked who he was, she was incredulous that they didn't already know. She had to tell them. His name was Harold Arnold Bicknell, but she didn't say it normally. She spat it out with sarcasm and ridicule. "And who is Harold Bicknell?" the detective asked the caller. "You don't even know that?" she snapped. "I thought you said you were a detective investigating those murders." Harold Bicknell was the 19-year-old grandson of Josephine Smith, nephew to Suzanne, and cousin to both Rachel and Renee. He was the same Harold Arnold Bicknell who sang in the church choir, volunteered for the Citizen Patrol for 1 day, and joined the Navy just 2 days after the murders. He was also the same Harold Bicknell who had a 14-year-old girlfriend, the girl on the telephone, who was really calling to get her rival in trouble. What had begun as a teenage slasher movie scenario was rooted in a teenage love triangle. The detective who took the call began investigating Harold by questioning his friends, and those who knew anything eventually spoke. On October 26th, Bicknell was arrested at the San Diego Naval Training Center and brought back to Monterey County. He later made a partial confession on tape. His 14-year-old girlfriend, Terry Marie Milligan, was also arrested and charged as a juvenile for her involvement in the murders. In late November, another young girl, 15-year-old Karen Kirby, was arrested and charged with murder. The district attorney's office remained tight-lipped about the exact roles of Milligan and Kirby. All that was known about Kirby was that she was a friend of victim Renee and her sister Raylene. She was also an acquaintance of Bicknell and Milligan, though she didn't know them very well. In February 1978, investigators revealed a surprise witness who had been in the duplex on the night of the murders. Not only were Milligan and her friend Karen Kirby present during the slaughter, but so was victim Renee's sister, Raylene Ferguson. The mind is a strange thing, and Raylene's had blocked out the trauma she witnessed that night. It was too much to process in minutes, hours, or even days. Instead, it remained like a dream, with fragments of memory hovering just out of reach, sensed but elusive, as if waiting around the next corner in her mind. Over time, however, the horrific events she had seen began to solidify, and by November, Raylene met with investigators and the district attorney to recount what she remembered. That testimony led to the arrest of Karen Kirby. During a court hearing in February 1978, Raylene testified that she had been standing outside the kitchen when the attack began, following an argument between Renee and Bicknell. "I heard screaming," she said, adding that she saw knives swinging and blood, and was then struck on the back of the head and knocked unconscious. She may also have passed out and hit her head. She recalled waking the next morning in Karen Kirby's bedroom, telling the 15-year-old girl that she had had a bad dream. She said, "I don't want to hear about it," Ferguson told the judge. Ferguson also testified that she once tried to tell Bicknell about the dream, and he had agreed, saying, "Yes, it does seem like a dream." With Raylene testifying against Bicknell and his confession on tape, it should have been a trial that ended in days, not 3 weeks. Harold, who had pleaded not guilty, claimed he could not recall killing anyone and disavowed his tape confession. Testifying on his own behalf, Harold Bicknell claimed he went over to the duplex late that night to confront his cousin Renee, who was supposedly going to tell his longtime girlfriend, the girl who had called the detective, about his inappropriate behavior with his underage girlfriend. Speaking in the third person, because he exhibited several personalities, Bicknell insisted that he killed for the noblest reason of all, When I look back, I see that he was fighting to protect love. One of his personalities declared in court. Apparently, this was the good personality, since it did not like the other one. The personality that had stabbed 4 members of his family over 100 times. When I see how much damage I wrought, I abhor that man, the high school dropout said, adding dramatic flair. Although he initially claimed he could not recall killing anyone, one of his personalities later confessed to jurors that he had killed the 3 younger females. He thoroughly denied killing Grandma, repeatedly blaming Karen Kirby and Terry Milligan. According to him, he would never have killed Grandma. It had to have been the others. The jury, however, abhorred the short young man responsible for so many lives. He was found guilty on April 21st. 1 month later, he was sentenced to 4 life terms to run concurrently, which effectively meant 1 life sentence. Though life without parole was not an option in the 1970s, and lenient prison rules meant he would have been eligible for parole in 7 years. Fortunately, the California Board of Parole Hearings did not allow leniency for lovesick mass murderers. Harold Arnold Bicknell is still serving his sentence at Salinas Valley State Prison in Soledad, and he is 58 years old. In June 1975, Terry Milligan was convicted in juvenile court of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. Karen Kirby was convicted of being an accessory, but was found not guilty of murder. Just as with their involvement in the murders that night, the exact details of their sentences were not made public. Updates in 2020 and 2021 revealed further developments in Harold Arnold Bicknell's case. On August 5, 2020, after serving 43 years in California prisons, Bicknell, inmate B94325, was granted parole by the California Parole Board during a July 30th weekly board meeting. The decision came despite emotionally charged objections from the victim's family, which also included his own relatives and letters from other family members opposing the release. The 2-member Board of Commissioners granted the 62-year-old a suitable for parole recommendation, citing his clean record while in state prison, his youth at the time of the crimes, and an abusive childhood as factors in their decision. Guidelines benefiting the parole board's process included considerations for both youth and elderly inmates. The youth guideline applies to most inmates under 26 at the time of their offense, while the elderly program applies to inmates at least 60 years old who have served at least 25 years behind bars. It's important to note that in California, being granted suitable for parole does not automatically mean an inmate is released. The July 30th, 2020 decision was actually Bicknell's second time being deemed suitable. The first had been in February 2019, but Governor Newsom overturned that decision after several family members protested. On August 21st, 2021, according to a CBS-affiliated station in San Francisco, Harold Bicknell would not be leaving prison anytime soon, after a state prison board rescinded its decision to issue him parole in the wake of public outrage and emotional pleas from the victims' family members. In July 2020, the state parole board granted Harold Bicknell suitable for parole, but this decision was appealed to Governor Newsom by the district attorney of Monterey County, where the murders had occurred. Newsom ordered a new parole board hearing, which was held in July 2021. During that meeting, the state parole board rescinded its earlier decision. In a statement released by the district attorney's office, the board explained that Mr. Bicknell is currently an unreasonable risk of danger to the public because he denied he was the perpetrator, which was implausible, and he failed to address factors leading up to or contributing to the crime. Case 2, let me explain Anita Lorraine Cobby, born Anita Lynch on November 2nd, 1959 in Sydney, was a young woman of 26 years living in Blacktown, New South Wales. She had grown up in a loving household with her father, Gary Bernard Lynch, a graphic artist with the Royal Australian Air Force, and her mother, Grace Peggy Lynch, a nurse. From a young age, Anita showed both ambition and a gentle determination, traits that guided her throughout her life. As a teenager, she entered beauty pageants, winning the Miss Western Suburbs pageant in November 1979, and even pursued modeling for a brief period. Yet she ultimately chose to follow her mother's path into nursing, dedicating herself to caring for others. While studying for her nursing degree at Sydney Hospital, she met John Cobby, whom she would marry on March 27, 1982. By 1986, the couple had separated, and Anita had returned to live with her parents in Blacktown. Although they remained on good terms and had even been planning a possible reconciliation, that on the evening of February 2nd, 1986, Anita completed her shift at Sydney Hospital at 3 p.m. and met some friends for dinner in Redfern. Afterwards, she boarded a train from Central Railway Station back to Blacktown. Typically, she would call her father from the station to pick her up, but that night the station phone was out of order. With no taxis available at the rank, she decided to walk home, a journey she had made countless times before. She walked alone along Newton Road, just after 10 p.m., unaware that a group of 5 men was waiting to seize her. As she walked, a stolen white HT Holden Kingswood approached. 2 men leapt from the car and forcibly dragged her inside. Anita screamed and kicked, trying to escape. Nearby, a teenage boy, his younger sister, and their mother heard the screams and rushed outside. They watched in horror as Anita was forced into the car. The boy ran across the street, hoping to intervene, but the vehicle drove away before he could reach it. Shaken, he called the police to report what he had seen. Minutes later, their neighbor and his girlfriend returned home, were informed of the abduction, and attempted to follow the car in search of it. They stopped on Reen Road in Prospect, using a spotlight to scan a nearby paddock. Seeing nothing and assuming the vehicle was a different model, they returned home. The attackers later admitted they had hidden in the long grass to evade detection. Inside the car, Anita's captors demanded she remove her clothes, but she refused. She begged them to let her go, emphasizing that she was married and menstruating. Her resistance was met with brutal violence. She was punched repeatedly, her nose and both cheekbones broken. Then, she was forced to perform sexual acts on all 5 men. At one point, they stopped at a service station to purchase fuel, using money stolen from Anita's purse, before continuing along Reen Road toward a secluded paddock. During the drive, Anita endured repeated assaults. She was held down, beaten, and raped repeatedly. When they arrived at the paddock, she was dragged along a barbed wire fence, sustaining further lacerations and bruising. Her attackers continued to physically and sexually abuse her in the isolated field. According to later confessions, John Travers became concerned that Anita might remember them and identify them to the authorities. He persuaded the others that she had to be killed. Under their collective urging, Travers slit her throat with such force that it almost severed her head. Forensic evidence later indicated that she was likely still conscious at the moment her throat was cut, and that she bled to death within 2 to 3 minutes. Anita did not return home. Her family initially assumed she might be staying with a friend, but after she failed to show up at work the next day, they reported her missing on February 3rd. On the morning of February 4th, a farmer checking on his cows in Prospect stumbled upon her naked body in a paddock. Anita was identified by her distinctive wedding ring, still on her finger. Her estranged husband, John Cobby, was initially suspected but quickly cleared of involvement. The news of Anita's murder shocked the Australian public. Details of the brutal crime provoked widespread outrage. On February 6th, the NSW state government offered a $50,000 Australian dollar reward for information leading to the arrest of her killers. On the same day, radio host John Laws obtained a leaked copy of Anita's autopsy report, which included graphic details of her injuries, and read it live on air. This caused widespread public anger, galvanizing calls for justice. Laws later explained that he believed the public had a right to know the truth of what had happened. Police reenacted Anita's movements on the night of her disappearance on February 9th, hoping witnesses might recall seeing her. Constable Debbie Wallace, dressed similarly to Anita, traveled the 9:12 p.m. train to Blacktown while detectives interviewed passengers and displayed photos of Anita to jog memories. Following a tip regarding the stolen Holden, police began searching for John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and the Murphy brothers, Les, Michael, and Gary, after discovering that some had histories of violence and that Travers carried a knife. On February 21st, Travers and Murdoch were arrested at Travers' uncle's home, and Les Murphy at Travers' house. Murdoch and Murphy were released on bail for unrelated stolen car offenses. Travers, detained for investigation, requested that a friend bring him cigarettes. This friend, later identified as Miss X, helped police by agreeing to wear a hidden recording device during visits, ultimately capturing confessions from Travers and Murdoch. Within 22 days of the murder, all 5 men were in custody. The 5 perpetrators had long criminal histories, including armed robbery, assault, larceny, car theft, breaking and entering, drug use, and rape. John Raymond Travers, 18 years old in 1986, was considered the ringleader. Raised in poverty as the eldest of 8 children from unmarried parents, he had developed a history of alcoholism and violent behavior from a young age. Michael Murdoch, also 18, was Travers' childhood friend and criminal associate. The Murphy brothers, Michael, Gary, and Les, ranged in age from 22 to 33 and had similarly troubled backgrounds, including criminal convictions and prior encounters with the justice system. The trial commenced in Sydney on March 16, 1987. Travers pleaded guilty before proceedings began. The remaining defendants were tried over 54 days, with the defense attempting to minimize their involvement. Medical examination of Anita's body revealed extensive bruising and cuts consistent with repeated and systematic assaults, including defensive wounds on her hands and deep lacerations from barbed wire. Cuts to her neck indicated near decapitation, and her injuries reflected the sheer violence of the attack. On June 10, 1987, all 5 men were convicted of sexual assault and murder. On June 16, they were each sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Justice Alan Maxwell described the crime as a cold-blooded, calculated killing and noted the enormity of the assault. In the aftermath, Anita's parents joined with the family of another young murder victim, Ebony Simpson, to establish the Homicide Victim Support Group, a community organization dedicated to supporting families affected by violent crimes. The Lynches also advocated for tougher sentencing laws, influencing legislation on truth in sentencing. Anita's father passed away in 2008, and her mother in 2013, the AS of 2025. The surviving perpetrators remain in various maximum security correctional facilities in New South Wales. John Travers remains at Wellington Correctional Center, while Les and Gary Murphy, along with Michael Murdoch, are housed in Goulburn Correctional Center. Michael Murphy died in 2019 due to liver cancer while imprisoned. Anita Cobby's murder has been the subject of numerous media portrayals, including television programs, podcasts, and films. The 1998 Australian film The Boys drew partial inspiration from her case. In 2016, for the 30th anniversary of her death, police released tape confessions from Travers and Murdoch obtained by Miss X, which were broadcast in a documentary titled Anita, You Thought You Knew It All. Another 90-minute documentary, Anita, was also released that year, ensuring that her story and the impact of the crime continues to be remembered. Case 3 Let Me Explain, when Michael ABT returned to his family home in Trevose, Pennsylvania, a quiet suburb of Philadelphia in Bensalem Township, he immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The usual hum of life that seemed to flow through every corner of the 2-story house. A subtle current of energy in the walls, floors, and ceilings that had always made the home feel alive was completely absent, replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness that made his stomach turn. As he stepped inside, the reason for that unnatural silence became horrifyingly clear. Blood stains marred the floors and walls, and bloody rags were scattered across the rooms, evidence of a violent scene that made him freeze in shock. According to a United Press International report published shortly after, Michael saw bloodstains and bloody rags and ran out of the house, his instincts driving him away from the nightmare unfolding within. When authorities from the Bensalem Police Department arrived and investigated the basement, they discovered the grisly sight of 6 bodies, each shot once in the side of the head, 5 of them belonging to Michael's own family members and the 6th to his sister's boyfriend, a young man whose life had been cruelly cut short alongside the rest. Tragically, Even the family's beloved Saint Bernard, a gentle dog that had once brought warmth and joy to the household, had been executed in the same brutal attack. The ABT family, once 7 strong, was now reduced to only Michael and his older brother Clifford, who was away in jail on a forgery charge, leaving the surviving family members shocked, devastated, and grappling with a loss so sudden and absolute that it seemed impossible to comprehend. For days after the massacre, investigators worked frantically, issuing the standard line that they were tracking several leads. But despite their efforts, police openly admitted that they had no idea who had carried out the murders, or, even more baffling, why anyone would commit such an act against an entire family, leaving the community of Trevose reeling from the horror that had erupted in what had once been an ordinary suburban home. Investigators did uncover one chilling truth about the killer. He was incredibly patient and methodical, a man whose calm determination turned the ABT family home into a meticulously orchestrated crime scene, far from any impulsive burglary gone wrong. This was a cold-blooded ambush, carried out with deliberate precision, as he had spent hours inside the house, waiting silently for each family member to arrive so he could shoot them in the head, having all the time in the world to reconsider or walk away, yet never once faltering in his deadly plan. The first victims were Kathy, just 15, and her younger brother John Jr., 13, who returned home from middle school shortly after 3 o'clock, only to be met with unspeakable violence. After shooting the 2 children, the killer carried their bodies down to the basement, carefully placing them beside the family dog, a gentle Saint Bernard, whom he had already executed after breaking into the house through the back door. 2 more hours passed before the next target appeared. Margaret ABT, 46, a diligent employee of the Internal Revenue Service, who arrived home from work around 5:15 p.m. mere minutes after her death. Her eldest daughter Margie, 19, returned from her own job, stepping through the front door and immediately being shot in the head, her life extinguished in an instant like the others. With time now pressing, the father's imminent return forced the killer to adapt. Unable to carry the women to the basement as he had with the others, he dragged Margaret and Margie to the top of the stairs near the back kitchen door and hurled them down the steps, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Once the violent work was done, he meticulously cleaned up the blood trails, leaving the house eerily quiet once again as if nothing had occurred, and then waited, silent and patient, for the next opportunity to unfold within his calculated massacre. Between 5:30 and 5:45 that afternoon, John ABT, the devoted father and scoutmaster, returned home from his job at the telephone company, unsuspecting of the horror that awaited him, and was shot the instant he closed the front door, his life ending, as abruptly as those of his children and wife had ended earlier that day. Shortly after, around 6 o'clock, Margie's fiancé, Gary Engel, became the 6th and final victim when he entered the house to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of the day he and Margie had first gone out together, only to be met with the same ruthless violence that had claimed every other family member. By approximately 6:30 p.m., the killer finally stood, left the house, and vanished into the shadows, deliberately sparing Michael and Clifford, fully aware of their presence and planning to kill them above all. But the relentless ringing of the telephone unnerved him, forcing him to reconsider. Perhaps a neighbor had heard the gunshots and was calling to check on the family, and the thought of being discovered made him pause. 10 days later, law enforcement arrested George Jeschwint, a former childhood friend and neighbor of Michael and Clifford, whose friendship with the brothers had been forged during preteen and teenage years filled with innocent adventures, playing pool, riding bikes around town, and engaging in the mischievous escapades common to boys growing up in that era. "We were real pains in the ass," Michael recalled in a 1991 interview, reflecting on their bond. "We were the best of friends." But the friendship fractured after George was sent to juvenile court for vandalism, a turbulent period in his life. When he lived with his mother, brother, and an abusive father who had even tried to kill him on multiple occasions, leaving a backdrop of anger, resentment, and instability that would later intersect with one of the most shocking mass murders in Trevose, Pennsylvania's history. According to Michael's 1991 interview, his mother had explicitly forbidden him from spending time with George Jeschwint, fearing that the boy would lead Michael into trouble. And Michael claimed that for the next 8 years, he and his brother Clifford largely ignored George, despite living just diagonally across the street from him, a proximity that made their estrangement all the more striking. Other accounts of the fractured friendship portray a far more hostile dynamic, describing how Clifford and Michael allegedly bullied George by shooting BB guns at him and his house, sending unwanted flowers and taxicabs to his home, and mocking his mother for a foreign accent, with Clifford, the older brother, reportedly taking the lead in the harassment. Whether George felt deeply humiliated by the ABT family as a whole or by Michael and Clifford in particular, that sense of shame and anger grew into a consuming desire for revenge, a need to set things right in his own mind, which at the age of 24 he considered justified. Driven by this fixation, George purchased a pistol, practiced methodically with it, and meticulously planned the attack, so that on the morning of March 12, 1976, he donned rubber gloves, broke into the ABT house through the back kitchen door, and settled onto the piano stool in cold, patient anticipation, waiting for the family to return home so he could carry out the calculated massacre he had envisioned for so long. George Geschwind had waited for 6 long hours for the youngest members of the ABT family to return from school, meticulously planning every detail of the attack, and yet, in a cruel twist of fate, the two he wanted to kill the most, Michael and Clifford, escaped his ambush, their lives spared for reasons as random as the ringing of a telephone. 10 days later, on March 22nd, George was brought in for questioning by Bensalem Township Police after children fishing in a nearby creek discovered the murder weapon, which investigators traced directly back to him. And that night, he confessed to the killings, describing the massacre as a personal vendetta and later claiming it was his only achievement in life. The revelation that their neighbor, who lived a mere 90 feet away, had committed such atrocities stunned brothers Michael and Clifford, and in the immediate aftermath, the two engaged in a public fistfight in front of a newspaper reporter, their anger and confusion spilling over in raw emotion, a clash fueled by an unspoken mix of blame, grief, and disbelief. Michael, in a moment of unrestrained fury, attempted to storm the Geschwind house, but was intercepted and tackled by a police officer just inside the yard, shouting through a swollen mouth, "I'm gonna kill him when I get him. I haven't talked to him in 8 years." It was senseless. When questioned later, Michael described George as a loner, a strange and withdrawn individual who had rarely left his house, never dated, and offered no explanation for why he would harbor such lethal animosity toward the family, insisting that if any bullying had occurred between them in the past, George had never mentioned it, and all that remained in Michael's mind were negative impressions of the former friend. In his own confession, George revealed his perspective, admitting that he would have waited until midnight to kill the two brothers as well. But the incessantly ringing phone unnerved him, creating the fear that someone might have overheard the gunshots and discovered his crime, leaving his meticulous plan unfinished and forever marking the lives of the ABT family with a horror that could never be undone. George Geschwind, the man who had meticulously planned and executed the brutal murders of the ABT family, initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that his mental state excused the horrific violence he had carried out. And when he went to trial in July on 6 counts of murder, a Bucks County jury ultimately found him guilty, sentencing him to die in the electric chair. However, when Pennsylvania's old death penalty laws were declared unconstitutional in 1977, his sentence was automatically commuted to 6 consecutive life terms in prison. By 1983, Geschwind had exhausted all of his appeals. Yet in February 1991, one of his previous arguments gained traction when a new federal judge ruled that the trial judge had erred by refusing to instruct jurors that they could find the unemployed landscaper not guilty by reason of insanity, noting that had the jurors been aware of this option, there is at least a reasonable possibility they would have returned a different verdict. Later that year, on November 8th, a 3-judge panel from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Geschwind should either be granted a new trial or released from prison, a decision that disappointed county prosecutors who subsequently appealed to the full panel of judges. After a second round of arguments in May 1992, the Third Circuit ultimately ruled against him, determining that the trial judge's instructions regarding a third-degree murder conviction had indeed provided sufficient consideration for his insanity claim, closing a complex legal chapter in one of Pennsylvania's most infamous family massacres. After the horrific murders of their family, brothers Michael and Clifford ABT spiraled into lives over which they had little control, forever marked by the trauma they endured. Clifford spent much of the next 13 years cycling in and out of jail before dying in August 1989 due to a severe reaction to an unspecified narcotic, leaving behind a life marred by instability and misfortune. By 1991, Michael's life had also fallen apart. He had lost his professional license, his job, and any semblance of a stable home. And during an interview with the Inquirer, he revealed that he was living in a motel with his pregnant girlfriend, a precarious existence that reflected the chaos that had overtaken him. For roughly a decade, Michael survived by selling methamphetamines, though he claimed during the interview that he had left that life behind. Yet the shadow of his family's murder continued to impact him in destructive ways. In March 1990, around the 14th anniversary of the killings, he became intoxicated and crashed his 1972 Toyota into the back of two cars at an intersection, resulting in probation and an order to pay $4,000 in restitution. Though George Geschwind had not killed Michael and Clifford directly, his actions had irreparably damaged their lives, leaving them to navigate a path of wreckage and loss that seemed inescapable. Meanwhile, George, now 64, continues to serve his life sentence at the State Correctional Institution, Mahoney, a medium-security prison in Schuylkill County. A grim reminder that while he survives behind bars, the ABT family's legacy of tragedy continues to echo through the shattered lives of the brothers who lived to tell the story. Case 4, let me explain. On the night of Halloween in 1974, Ronald O'Brien took his 8-year-old son, Timothy, and his daughter, Elizabeth, out trick-or-treating with some neighborhood friends in the Deer Park suburb of Houston. The evening was damp with a light rain, so they only visited houses within a 2-block radius, collecting candy for about half an hour before returning home. Later that night, as the children prepared for bed, Ronald allowed both of them to enjoy a single piece of candy each before sleep. Both Timothy and Elizabeth chose large pixie sticks from the assortment they had gathered during their short outing. According to Ronald, 30 seconds after leaving Timothy's room, he heard his son calling out to him, crying, "Daddy, Daddy, my stomach hurts." Rushing to his side, Ronald found Timothy convulsing in the bathroom, vomiting, gasping for breath, and suddenly going limp. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Timothy passed away 90 minutes later. By the following day, authorities had determined that the pixie sticks Timothy had eaten contained cyanide. Elizabeth, the 5-year-old daughter, had also chosen one of the same candies before going to bed, but remained unopened in her hand the next morning, still sealed with staples. And it, too, was laced with poison. The tragic news of a child being deliberately poisoned spread rapidly, shocking communities across Texas and the entire United States. One local detective involved in the investigation advised parents to dispose of all Halloween candy their children collected, emphasizing that the risk was too great. If parents want their children to eat candy, let them go to the store and buy candy, the detective warned, highlighting the fear and caution that haunted families in the aftermath of the horrifying incident. Following the tragic death of Timothy O'Brien, parents across the country heeded the warnings of local authorities and discarded all of their children's Halloween candy, a cautionary act that permanently altered the way many families viewed what had once been a beloved holiday. Ronald O'Brien, an optician by profession, assisted police in their efforts to trace the origin of the poisoned pixie sticks, helping them attempt to identify the house where the deadly candy had been distributed. During their search, investigators discovered 5 additional poisoned pixie sticks in the possession of other children who had accompanied the O'Briens on their trick-or-treating route that night. Although Ronald initially appeared cooperative, his assistance soon raised suspicions among detectives. He seemed unable to pinpoint the exact house where the candy had come from, even though it was located in a small, easily searchable area. Further investigation revealed that Ronald had recently purchased multiple life insurance policies on both of his children, including a $30,000 policy on Timothy, equivalent to roughly $145,000 in 2015 dollars. On Monday, November 4th, Ronald O'Brien was arrested and charged with the murder of his son. Authorities initially kept details of the evidence under wraps, but a week later, a recorded grand jury hearing made it clear that investigators had little doubt about his guilt. Evidence presented during the investigation painted a chilling picture. 2 months before Timothy's death, O'Brien had contacted a chemist friend to inquire about cyanide, asking specifically how he could obtain it and what dose would be fatal. When questioned about his intentions, O'Brien insisted he was just curious and offered no further explanation. Additional testimony revealed that he had attempted to purchase potassium cyanide from a chemical supplier, but the only available quantity was a bulk 5-pound supply, which he declined, citing its excessive size. On the night of Halloween, friends who had accompanied the O'Briens reported that Ronald had gone to one particular house alone, returning with pixie sticks that he then handed out to his own children, 2 other neighborhood children, and another child, all of whom were placed at risk. For these acts, he was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder in addition to the murder of Timothy. Further details presented in court included testimony from Ronald's own brother, who described him as a poor manager who struggled to maintain employment and was in a difficult financial situation at the time of his son's death, underscoring a potential motive behind the horrifying crime. During Ronald O'Brien's trial in May of 1975, several witnesses, including his own wife, came forward to testify against him, providing a damning account of his motives and character. Daneen O'Brien described life with her husband as a constant struggle under the weight of debt and financial pressure. Despite being behind on some loan payments, she revealed that Ronald had purchased $10,000 worth of accidental life insurance policies for each of their children. Following Timothy's funeral, she discovered that he had spent an additional $108 in premiums on 2 more policies, each valued at $20,000. When Ronald began discussing how they would use the insurance money after their son's tragic death, she became deeply alarmed, noting that he wanted to first pay off bills and then take a trip to Florida. The Associated Press captured her demeanor during the proceedings, noting that Mrs. O'Brien, testifying in a trial that could send her husband to the electric chair, appeared cool and without emotion. She spoke in a clear, steady voice and kept her eyes averted from her husband. Further reinforcing suspicions of premeditation, Ronald's insurance agent testified that he had called within hours of Timothy's death to initiate the claim process, showing a disturbing immediacy in his actions and underscoring the financial motive that had haunted the entire case. In his final statement before the execution, Ronald O'Brien drew heavily on his Christian faith, framing his last words around forgiveness for those he believed were about to wrong him. He declared that what was about to occur was unjust, acknowledging that while human beings and systems are capable of mistakes, this execution represented one of those errors rather than a complete failure of the justice system itself. He stated that he forgave everyone who had participated in his death in any capacity and asked forgiveness from anyone he may have offended during his 39 years of life, offering that forgiveness freely in return to those who had wronged him. He also prayed for God's forgiveness for all people, emphasizing human imperfection, and expressed deep, enduring love for his family and those close to him, urging them to know in their hearts that he loved them all. He ended his statement with a blessing, wishing God's best blessings upon everyone, signing his name and adding a postscript noting that during his time in custody, he had been treated well by all Texas Department of Corrections personnel. Outside the Huntsville, Texas prison, a grim and unsettling scene unfolded as employees from a local bar handed out pixie sticks to the crowd of approximately 200 to 300 people who had gathered outside the death chamber. A chilling echo of the candy forever tied to the crime that earned Ronald O'Brien his place in American criminal history. Case 5 Let Me Explain. On December 24th, 2002, 27-year-old Lacey Denise Peterson disappeared from her home in Modesto, California, while 8 months pregnant with her first child. The disappearance immediately drew nationwide attention, and prompted a massive search effort. By April 2003, the remains of Lacey and her unborn son, whom the couple had planned to name Connor, were discovered along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay. Lacey's husband, Scott Lee Peterson, was arrested shortly afterward and charged with the murder of both his wife and unborn child. In 2004, Scott was convicted of first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for Connor. He was initially sentenced to death, but in 2020, his death sentence was overturned. In 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Most recently, in 2024, he was granted a status hearing following a request by the LA Innocence Project, which claimed to have new evidence supporting his innocence. Lacey Peterson, born Lacey Denise Rocha on May 4, 1975, was the younger of two children of Sharon, née Anderson, and Dennis Robert Rocha. She had an older brother, Brent, born in 1971. Her parents divorced in 1977, and Sharon moved with Lacey and Brent to Modesto, California, while Lacey continued to visit her father's dairy farm on weekends. Lacey worked on the farm from a young age and enjoyed gardening with her mother. Her mother later had a long-term partner, Ron Gransky, who helped raise Lacey and Brent. Lacey was active in school as a cheerleader and went on to study ornamental horticulture at California Polytechnic State University. Scott Lee Peterson, born October 24, 1972, in San Diego, California, was the only child of Lee Arthur Peterson, a crate packaging business owner, and Jacqueline Jackie Helen Latham, who owned a boutique. Scott had 6 half-siblings from his parents' previous relationships and grew up sharing a bedroom with his half-brother John. An accomplished golfer from a young age, Scott competed with future pro Phil Mickelson in high school. He later enrolled at Arizona State University on a partial golf scholarship, but eventually transferred to Cuesta College and then to Cal Poly, where he graduated in 1998 with a degree in agricultural business. Scott and Lacey met while he worked at Pacific Cafe in Morro Bay during college, and she occasionally visited. They began dating in mid-1994 after Lacey sent him her phone number. Their relationship became serious, and Scott gave up his golfing ambitions to focus on a business career. After dating for 2 years, the couple married in 1997 at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. They briefly opened a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, but later sold it and moved to Modesto to start a family. In October 2000, they purchased a home on Covina Avenue. Lacey worked part-time as a substitute teacher, while Scott earned $5,000 per month at Trade Corp USA. In 2002, Lacey became pregnant with a due date of February 10, 2003. Meanwhile, Scott began an affair with Amber Fry, a Fresno massage therapist, in November 2002 to disappearance on December 23, 2002. Lacey and Scott visited Salon, where Lacey's sister worked, and Scott had his monthly haircut. He offered to pick up a fruit basket, claiming he would play golf the next day. Lacey spoke to her mother, Sharon, at 8:30 p.m. that evening. The last known people to talk to her were Amy, Sharon, and Scott. On December 24th, Scott claimed he last saw Lacey at 9:30 a.m. while he went fishing at Berkeley Marina. Neighbors later reported seeing the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, wandering alone around 10:18 to 10:45 a.m. Scott said Lacey was home and that the house seemed empty when he returned around 2:15 p.m. to leave a message for her. Concerned for Lacey's welfare, Scott called Sharon and, together with Lacey's stepfather, reported her missing shortly before 6 p.m. Lacey was 7.5 months pregnant at the time. Search and investigation detectives Alan Brocchini and John Bueller responded and began the investigation, finding Lacey's personal belongings in a closet and organizing an extensive search. Over 900 volunteers combed the neighborhood on foot, horseback, and with helicopters. The search drew nationwide media attention, with a reward eventually reaching $500,000. Lacey's family and friends established a command center and a website to aid in the search. Though detectives initially did not suspect foul play, they soon focused on Scott due to his suspicious demeanor and inconsistencies in his statements. The investigation uncovered Scott's affair with Amber Fry. Amber revealed that Scott had claimed to be single in November 2002 and a widower by December 9th. suggesting he had planned Lacey's murder in advance. Detectives used a recording device to document conversations between Scott and Amber. On January 15, 2003, Lacey's family was informed of the affair, and by January 24th, both Lacey's family and Amber held press conferences detailing Scott's deceit. Discovery of bodies. On April 13, 2003, a male fetus was found in San Francisco Bay, and the next day, a human torso was discovered nearby. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Lacey and Connor. Autopsies revealed severe decomposition. Lacey's body was missing her head, arms, most of her legs, and internal organs. Connor's body had minor decomposition and a nylon cord around him, consistent with post-mortem processes in water. The autopsies indicated that Connor had died in utero and was expelled during decomposition. Following the discovery, Scott became the prime suspect. Police found a hair matching Lacey's on a pair of pliers in Scott's fishing boat and discovered cement anchors he had made, allegedly to weigh Lacey's body in the bay. Scott was arrested on April 18, 2003, at Torrey Pines Golf Course in La Jolla. Authorities claimed he was attempting to flee to Mexico, noting his dyed hair, switched car, multiple cell phones, and survival gear. Scott was booked in Stanislaus County Jail and arraigned on April 21, 2003, pleading not guilty. Scott's trial began on June 1, 2004, with Rick DeStaso as the lead prosecutor and Mark Garagos as defense counsel. The prosecution presented circumstantial evidence, highlighting Scott's affair, inconsistent statements, and unusual behavior before and after Lacey's disappearance. The defense emphasized the absence of direct evidence and challenged the reliability of mitochondrial DNA evidence linking Lacey to Scott's boat. Scott's demeanor and the phone calls to Amber after Lacey vanished were heavily scrutinized. That on November 12, 2004, the jury convicted Scott of first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for Connor. He was sentenced to death on December 13, 2004. The jury cited hundreds of pieces of circumstantial evidence in support of the conviction. In March 2005, Scott was sent to San Quentin State Prison on death row. Scott filed a direct appeal and a habeas corpus petition, citing trial errors, juror misconduct, and new evidence. In 2020, the California Supreme Court upheld the conviction but overturned his death sentence, citing improper juror dismissals. In 2021, he was resentenced to life without parole. The LA Innocence Project began advocating for him in 2024, leading to limited DNA testing on duct tape found on Lacey's pants. However, a 2025 appeals court denied their habeas petition. Scott filed a direct appeal and a habeas corpus petition, citing trial errors, juror misconduct, and new evidence. In 2020, the California Supreme Court upheld the conviction but overturned his death sentence, citing improper juror dismissals. In 2021, he was resentenced to life without parole. The LA Innocence Project began advocating for him in 2024, leading to limited DNA testing on duct tape found on Lacey's pants. However, a 2025 appeals court denied their habeas petition.